UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasions, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Crossfire.
Good evening to the greatest podcast audience on the planet. You've tuned in to UAP Crossfire, your podcast of choice for all things UAP. And here with the crew tonight, we have your usual lineup of veteran investigators of veterans. They have all served our nation well. We salute you guys. Thank you for your service. Welcome to Chris DePerno. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, Padre. It's going to be a good show today.
I think it will be. Commander Cobra, welcome. Good to see you, brother. How you doing?
Good evening, and I'd also like to let the audience know that it's a little-known fact, but the violin playing was Decker on our show. Just to let you know that.
Well, I didn't know that. Good evening, Mr. Decker. Maestro Decker, should I say? How things are in sunny California tonight?
Very warm, very warm. And my wife has been on my case to get outside and pick up our doggy love deposits. And I said, when it's cooler, much cooler.
So I guess that's what, December?
No, that'll be early wee hours in the morning.
I see.
Wee hours in the morning. There he is.
I have just the opposite situation here, Don, in the great Northeast territories. I have to wait till the sun's up around 10 or 11 p.m. to clean up. So I don't have to use a pickaxe and a shovel.
Hey, I was going to ask you, here in the North Country, as we get into the summer months, how late does the sun stay up there in Maine?
We get probably where I'm at 9:40, probably the latest.
Wow, that's
now. When I was in Germany, it would be 10:40. I was, higher latitude. When I was in Vermont, right on the 45th parallel, it was 10:15, 10:20 at the height.
Yeah, people don't realize that most of Europe is like north of Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah,
you look at it on a map, go straight across. It's pretty far north up there.
Once upon a time, they were nothing but ice fields, like we were here in North America until the Younger Dryas thing, and then they kind of melted.
You were growing up then. Tell us what it was like going to school.
Cold, very cold.
Okay. Well, we got a special show tonight for our listeners. Each of us has been asked to delve into our past and come up with the 3 most impactful UAP sightings or events that have touched our lives in some way. Maybe it was the one that kindled our interest, or something that was brought us an emotional response, something we found scientifically interesting. And we're going to go through those this evening. And I think, guys, the way I'd like to do is just go around the horn, give us one at a time, and give us an opportunity to talk about them. Commander, a question.
Yes, a question. I'd like to put a question out to the audience and to my hosts. What will be the impact of tariffs on UAP sightings?
Wow.
Look at the look as they're trying to analyze. Here I am just trying to throw a little current event. We've got this global trade war going on, tariffs. I just want to know if there's going to be an impact on UAP sightings.
I was going to ask you, Commander, if you've been in the moonshine early. Of course, back where you're at, it's not that early.
It's not early, my friend. Remember, it's always 5:00 in Maine.
That's an interesting question.
I thought I would go first because what really got me interested in the whole thing was a story I read when I was about 9 years old. And it was one of these books about the strange things of our planet and the mysteries that have been unsolved. I don't remember the name of it, but it had things in there about UFOs and Bigfoot. And there was this thing called the David Lang mystery. And maybe it's something that a lot of people haven't heard of. But what happened was on September 23rd, 1880 is allegedly when this took place. There was an incident on a farm near is it Gallatin, Tennessee, or Gallatin, Tennessee? Forgive me if I mispronounced that. And it basically sounds like something that would be from the X-Files. But here's what happened. There's a farm with David Lang and his wife, Emma Lang, and their two kids, George and Sarah. The kids are playing in the yard. Mrs. Lang is up there on the porch watching them play. And David starts to head across the pasture to check on some horses. Now, at just about that time, a local judge named August Peck and his brother-in-law roll up in their horse-drawn buggy, catching the family's attention. And David waves, and then he turns back toward the house, and he's supposedly just out of existence, right there in front of everybody. And so initially they thought, well, maybe he fell in a hole or an abandoned well or a mine or something. So they all converge on the spot that they last saw him, and there's nothing there. He's simply gone. And then supposedly what happened was about a year later, his daughter, missing her dad terribly, is out around that same spot. And they know it's the same spot because the grass, depending upon the account, is either growing excessively or not growing at all in a circular formation. And she hears her father calling for help at that exact location. Summons some others, and they can hear him too, but it's getting fainter and fainter. And that's the last anybody heard of David Lang. Now, have any of you guys heard of that story before?
Yeah.
Yeah, Silverback.
Absolutely. That's an old one, huh?
Yeah, 1880. Yeah, but when you're a 9-year-old kid and you read that people could suddenly just poof out of existence, it gets your attention, and it scared me. But sadly, it appears to be this was a hoax. And what happened was there was a science fiction horror writing contest. And some researchers, Robert Forrest and Bob Rickards, smelled something fishy. They looked into this. They checked census records, property deeds, and local archives in Gallatin and in Nashville, and there's no record of any David Lang or Emma Lang, no Judge August Peck, no newspaper clippings about the supposed disappearance or a guy evaporating in a field, just a dead-end trail. A librarian named Herschel Payne also poked around and found out that there's no trace of a written record of this event. So where'd it come from? Leading stories point to a short story by Ambrose Bierce called The Difficulty of Crossing a Field. And that was published in 1888, later in a 1893 collection, Can Such Things Be? And that was a time in our country when a lot of people were really getting into this horror, sci-fi, pulp magazines were coming into existence, and a lot of people were putting forward things that they thought were just good campfire stories. Another account says it came from a lying contest. Apparently, some of these towns looking for entertainment before cable or satellite dishes would get together and see who could tell the biggest lie. But nonetheless, when you're a 9-year-old kid and you read something like that, it gets you thinking. And that's what really got me going initially into what were then UFOs and cryptozoology. Any comments,
Padre,
guys?
Oh, there's
May
a
I-
million comments.
Yeah.
I'd first like to point out that Tennessee makes some of the finest whiskey, and that could have been an accelerant in this story.
What do you think,
That's
Chris?
true. I even though that's a lie and it's a fabricated story,
Mhm.
those things are actually happening. David Police wrote Missing 411, and he has actual accounts of people who've lost their children. They are in the middle of a field or the backyard or wherever they're camping at, and they suddenly just disappear. They said, I turned my head for 1 second and we'll look back, and there's no way she can run that far. She's a small toddler. And, David's had many stories of that type of thing. And I actually investigated one in the Dutchess County area of New York, where a woman said years ago when her child was very young, she was playing in a sandbox. She says, I got this. And she actually showed me this big picture window. And the child was playing in a sandbox. And, like every mother, there's something on the table, you're moving or you're doing something. And she says it was only for a second, and it's a big lawn. There's nothing to obstruct the view, but the child was gone. And she frantically went outside, didn't see where it is. She goes inside, and the child is back, playing in the sandbox again. And when you know, that night, they saw a triangle hovering over the house across the street. So they're trying to put two. We can't put two to do together because they never did see a craft over their house, but they did see one across the street over the neighbor's house. So there has been many sightings and many abductions in the Dutchess County, the Pine Bush area. It became very famous. I call it the Area 51 of the East Coast.
People don't often think that something like this happens that often, but you are a detective, and so is Don. You would know that we have, I believe, 500,000 reports of missing people each year in the United States, and missing person cases are probably the most common kind of a case. I've been told that about half of those are eventually resolved. Just as the case where you mentioned, Chris, where somebody wanders off and is gone for several hours. But 250,000 people just gone. Do you have any thoughts on that, Don?
Well, back in 1989, a friend of mine who was at that time the state director for MUFON for the state of Idaho, we met, found out we had mutual interest, became friends, and he came to me one day with a story, a case that just popped open. Now, let me preface that by saying back in 1981, 82, I was involved, as a matter of fact, was lead investigator originally, on 2 cattle mutilations in the state of Idaho, which incidentally, I might add, were never solved. But with that being said, I was familiar with the mutilation phenomena. I had not at that point met Linda Moulton Howe, but I was aware of her when she was a reporter, still a reporter, did a special called A Strange Harvest that dealt with that. So, I mean, I was familiar with the mutilation thing. And this fellow, the state director of Idaho, his name was Don Mason. And he said, "Hey, Don," he said, I got something here. He said, I just don't know what to do with it. And so I asked him, I said, "Well, what is it?" Well, between Jerome, Idaho, and I'm trying to remember now what the other town was, some people out, I guess they were hiking, came across the nude body of a man who was dead. He was exsanguinated, and he had parts of his body removed, just like the cattle mutilations. Now, that kind of put me onto something because I knew John Keel. Periodically, Keel was in New York. I was out west. I would talk to Keel, had a great respect for him for the stuff that he brought forward over the years. And he said, "Oh, man," he said, "mutilations, it's an old story." And then he gave me some examples. Well, I said, "What the hell? I got nothing else really going on. I'm going to jump into it." And I did. For about 3-4 solid years, I beat my head on the wall. Okay, now, the reason I mention all this is that this is something that I thought David Paulides would find of interest. Now, I knew Paulides, all right? And matter of fact, I interviewed Paulides, and his Missing 411 books on my radio show, which at that time was on Cyberstation USA out of Boston. Now, I'm going to be very honest and blunt, okay? Because that's the way you guys know me. I've never couched.
Yeah, I was going to say, Don, that's really not an announcement we really need. We need the announcement that you're going to go off That's that. So,
okay.
The stock market futures just took a dive because they got scared for a second.
David Polides is an acquired taste. All right. I had a tremendous amount of audience interest in having him back on periodically. So I said, yeah, hell, that's a great idea. So I called him, and somebody picked up the phone and hung it up. And I called him back. Somebody picked up the phone and hung it up. Oh, I guess he didn't want to talk to anybody. So I waited some time, and I called him again. Not that day, but a different day. And reached nobody. Okay. So I figured, well, I don't know what's going on. I'm not going to bug the guy. Obviously, he didn't want to be bugged. Then on Facebook, out of the blue, I get a request for Facebook friendship with him. And I said, oh my God, yeah. And I approved it. 30 seconds later, on my private Facebook page, he's got this big commercial, thing for his books and everything on my private page. And I got to say, that irritated me. And I immediately took it down. And then I got in touch with him. I said, look, I've got a Dark Matters Radio fan page on Facebook. You're more than welcome to put it up there. Well, why'd you take it down? I said, well, I took it down because, number one, it's my private Facebook page. Number two, I just said you could go on the Dark Matters page and put it there. And, hey, the story's closed. Well, nobody else ever did that. And then he immediately blocked me. Okay. So what are you going to do? That's not the way somebody professionally acts. And the guy is supposedly an ex-cop. So, hey. All right, I'll be the first to admit I was a little pissed off about that, but
you
is.
Hide it well, though, Decker. You hide it well. So it's funny you bring it up because Mr. Polides, I tried to get him on Task Force Griffin, and the phone got answered and the email got answered, and they said we're not interested in your style of show. I said, okay. Thanks so much for your time. Like the books, like the research, continued success. So maybe it was he knew that I was connected to you, Don. I don't know. That could be it. Maybe that's what happened to you, that they knew that in the future you were going to be connected with me because all that happened with you before you and I were linked up. So I don't know.
I just want to chime in, Don. I think you're right. He's an acquired taste. And when I met him, he wasn't the flavor of choice for me.
Well, look, I try to treat everybody with their due respect. And, hey, I'll sit there. I'm a great listener, man. You wouldn't believe to some of the shit I've listened to. But, I'll sit there and, talk away. But, that kind of thing, that's not good. That's not good.
Try being a pastor.
Oh, I'll bet. I'll bet.
I would love to go into a confession booth one time. I wonder how many cases I could solve by sitting in a confession booth. I would dress up. I would do that. I would dress up as a priest, go in the confession booth, and tell all you sinners, come on over here. Anybody I can put the handcuffs on,
you're going straight to hell, Chris.
Yeah, Baptist is going to be after you. So, Commander Cobra. You didn't weigh in on the David Langer disappearance subject, and I know that you have participated, I bet, in your day in some search and rescue type operations. What are your thoughts on disappearances?
Well, I took a different approach to the assignment tonight, Padre. Being raised a good Catholic and going to parochial school, and I am no longer a practicing Catholic, so we'll let all those things work with the sanctity of the confession in some doubt with Chris DePerno. I want to take I have a three-way run on this. And the first one I'm going to talk about is kind of what you talked about, Dan. What got you, what lit the spark? You know, what got it going? And I have to say it's my dad. My dad was a rabid UFO enthusiast. I mean, he was just absolutely taken with it. I think it was partially the outgrowth of what was going on with the Mercury space program at that time, the talk about going to the moon. And I believe it was Frank Edwards' books. I am almost positive that UFO magazine was in the house at least once. And here we are with Don and Vicky. We're here on the show. So the house was filled with paperbacks, and paperbacks was the medium in that day. I mean, there were just one after another. Some of it, much like the story that you open with, you know, a very small shred of light in the sky turns into a pulp masterpiece of 80 to 150 pages, and my parents had no problem explaining to me that extraterrestrials could exist. It was not a threat to their religious beliefs. It didn't. They didn't see any of it. It just didn't make sense not to think that. And one thing I do like to credit both my parents with is they've always given me a pretty good guidance on never try to estimate or call how God has this set up. And I knew that was going to make the Padres smile, because that seems to be where we get a little bit of muck as a group of people. Now, with that said, that very first really big deal that went on, I was very young when we had the Hills, Barney and Betty, right up the road from us. Exeter, the Exeter UFO experience that happened. My parents would get in the car. We would drive up to those locations. We would look at the places where this went on. There was a report in Leominster, Mass, of something over the city hall. And it was just part of my very early childhood that this was something that was happening. And that really, starting with my dad, and I'd have to say that the Hills in Exeter probably was the really big tip-off for me. And I'm, without thinking back, I probably was in any place from 3 up to about 6 or 7 with those activities, those things that were happening. So that really was what started. And, every area around this country and around this globe has UAP activity. And it goes up and down in different cycles of things that are happening, what people are seeing, what they're reporting. And I live and wonder now with the kind of times that we're in now, why we're not seeing more.
Had your father had a UFO experience? Did he recount it?
No, he didn't. I think he would love to have had it. In fact, I remember, and I'm laughing because it was a family outing to the theater when the theater was the thing, and we went to see Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And my dad wanted to be Richard Dreyfuss in that movie. He wanted that experience. And we were driving home, and my mom and dad are in the front seat of the car, a Dodge Dart, a blue Dodge Dart, light blue. And I remember my mom saying, "So you would have gotten on the spaceship?" And my dad, without really thinking, let the truth fall out. Yeah, I couldn't pass that up. So immediately that led to, well, what about me and your son and that whole thing that was going on? So a little inside look. This is a show that my parents will not be allowed to hear. They're both still living, thankfully. So they will not be allowed to hear this show because I don't want to relive that whole moment with them now. in their late 80s, because I'm sure my mom will, like that, be on it like it was back when that movie came out.
Well, I know I used to drive a Dodge Dart, a brown one with a white racing stripe.
Well, that was the Swinger. We had the two-door Swinger that had that Dodge Brown with the white. I think we had the double piping, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, then I got T-boned by a guy in a little red car that was adorned with marijuana leaves.
Oh my gosh!
Shocking! I can't even imagine how that could have happened.
Yeah, I can't.
I just wanted to come in quickly because you touched on something, and I got a question for all of you. But if I had to name 3 impactful cases for myself, because meeting him and getting to know him, Travis is number 1 on my list.
Sure.
Number 2 is the Betty and Barney Hill, not just because of the case, because if you think about what was going on at that time,
absolutely,
with the civil rights movement, interracial, and do you think they actually wanted all that attention to them coming out with this? I mean,
in fact, Mr. Hill, Barney Hill, said he wanted nothing to do with this because he
Exactly.
thought it was detracting from his work in the civil rights part.
Not to mention, at the time, they were an interracial couple
Exactly.
when that wasn't around.
Exactly. Right. And third is Roswell, because of all the things that are attached to Roswell. But I want to ask all of you this question, because for me, an impactful case is my own personal experience, both in 95, 99, and I know Don has an experience, and I know maybe a few of you may have. It changes everything, the way you perceive things, the way you look at things. I mean, it is a life-changing experience. And even when I was on the beach in Montauk, when I saw the lights over the ocean, I felt the spiritual connection to it. You know, it was something. I was not scared. It was beautiful. It was like a personal connection to something that was going on in front of me. And it changed my whole perception. And believe it or not, it's because of those experiences that I sit here today with you doing what I do, because I am still seeking for that truth. And I want answers. And I want to hear what all of you have to say, and the guests that come on and the people that interact and chat. I mean, for me, this is a journey, and I'm still on that journey. And listening to all of you talking about this is just fascinating. So I'm going to let it get back to you. But have you, my question going back to it is, have any of you had any personal experience, and did that change anything within you, how you viewed things and your perception of things? Because it is.
I'm going to jump in on this one, Scott.
I'm out.
So I haven't had the benefit of that kind of reaction or that kind of interaction, but as we've said before in the show, I think we all agree, I don't need the government to tell me or anything else to tell me what this is. I believe in a invisible God to many people on this little blue planet. Now I see things connected to that belief and that experience that tell me that God exists. So it's not a hard leap for me to understand. Now, the intricacies of, are we talking about good guys, bad guys? Is there evil? Is there good spirituality connected with it? I think all those are possibilities, and I'm very intrigued to hear that. The couple of things that I did have happen in the past turned out to be advanced military systems things, and in one of them it was actually comical what it was. Still can't really talk about it, but the technology, they were going for a very specific way of not being seen easily and being able to stay in the air a long time, and it looked heck of a lot better. It's like a lot of women that I knew look better at a distance in the dark, kind of thing, if that makes any sense. Please, no letters to Bill Skywatcher. Just send the hate email right to Commander Cobra, KGRADB, gmail.com. He doesn't need that to say through that. So I did have one recent in the last 4 or 5 years where I saw and I talked about it on the show a number of times, where the sphere, the ball of light, what it was and how it moved, how it departed, that was extraordinary. The rapid acceleration that we hear talk about, And it was on a very, very busy road as I was driving up through Connecticut, coming back up into Maine where I live. And it was because the traffic was slow and we were just easing along, and I had the opportunity to look around. Very unusual place for this to happen between Danbury and coming up to the line. So I understand that. And I think that it's a real gift that people have the experience where they have a positive spiritual kind of charging out of it, that they find some kind of fulfillment, and it sets them up on that.
Don, you have investigated probably tens of thousands of cases in your life. Is there one that just stands out as a life changer for you?
Are you talking criminal or are you talking
UAP.
UFO, UAP? Oh, UAP. Okay. Well, there are actually 3 cases that I consider of extreme importance. But before I go there, let me say this. When my wife, Vicki, and I were publishing UFO Magazine, we were often in contact with the DOD, NASA, butted heads with every skeptic of note across the United States and in the UK. And in 1991-92, we became privy to a document that surfaced out of NASA, okay? Now, before I go any further with that, I've got to say this. NASA, going back to when Dwight Eisenhower created the agency, was always considered the good guys, okay? Going back to the very beginning of the American race into space. And then, of course, under President Kennedy, we got the challenge to go to the moon and so on and so forth. Now, it wasn't until Congress, in its infinite wisdom, and I say that with my tongue firmly in my cheek, every time they would get into a cost-cutting mode, one of the first places they would go to is NASA, and chopped their legs out from under them. Perfect case in point was the SETI program that NASA had set up. Okay, they had scheduled it for 10 years to use NASA equipment, facilities, etc., to search for an ET signal. Lasted 1 year, and they cut it, okay? And it was infinitesimal in the budget of things. Well, 1991-92, there was a great deal of controversy among a number of things dealing with NASA. One of them involved a very small nuclear generator, okay, that they had intended to place on their probes and spacecraft and what have you, which would give them, for all intents and purposes, all the power they could want to run that equipment until the thing crashed into a planet or something. Well, a lot of people had a lot of questions, and NASA, which always billed itself as the most open federal agency around, okay, were getting snowed under with FOIA requests. Well, somewhere inside NASA, somebody decided, we're tired of this stuff. We don't have to answer all these FOIA requests. So they put out a memorandum. The memorandum stated to all mid-level management, this is what you do. You mix up the documents, you mix up the files, you change the file names, and all this kind of stuff, and we can circumvent all this FOIA business. Well, somebody got a copy of that and sent it to, I believe it was a Michigan congressman by the name of Howard Wolpe. Well, that story broke. Now, at that time, Admiral Richard Truly was the director of NASA. He saw that. He went livid okay? And he vowed he was going to clean house and get this squared away. Well, at that period of time, George H.W. Bush was the president. Dan Quayle was the vice president. Something happened between Quayle and Truly. George H.W. fired him. And then they brought in the next director, okay, who was from, oh, geez, right now the corporation is escaping me. But the guys that built top secret spy satellites, that was the new director of NASA. So the black curtain came down. Now, many of the missions that NASA did couldn't have been done on their budget. They didn't have the budget. So who came in and picked up the slack? The DOD, Department of Defense. And when that happened, by necessity, military secrecy became the norm. And many of these problems that we've been encountering today, okay, with the UAP question, there's still, ladies and gentlemen, don't for a second think this disclosure business is going to go very far, because ultimately it's the people that are behind Donald Trump's swamp that are keeping the lid tamped down. Now, the three UFO situations that I find most impressive for me mostly take place in outer space, not down here on the planet. The first one being STS-48, all right, where a space shuttle encountered an object above New Zealand and Australia where something appeared to be fired at this bogey, okay, which took violent evasive maneuvers to get out of the way of whatever that was. Personally, I think it was Ronald Reagan's
Star Wars.
Yes, the Star Wars they created, which basically was a massive, gigantic shotgun called Brilliant Pebbles, which were to impact climbing ICBMs. I think that was used because that's what it looked like to me. But at any rate, okay, that's the first case. The second case happened in 91 with that's when it came to light. The Soviet Union's Phobos 2 probe, which got to Mars. NASA was a joint partner in that mission. Part of it was working on a plan to possibly do a joint manned and female mission to Mars using cosmonauts and astronauts. The time frame they were shooting for was 2015. Well, obviously, that's 10 years ago now. Never happened. But Phobos 2 encountered something that the Russians said rammed their probe, turning it into a spinner, and they lost complete contact and control of it. The third case took place over not 2, but 3 weeks in the summer of '52 over Washington, D.C., the great Washington, D.C. 1952 saucer flap, where these things came in, swarmed the skies over D.C., flew with impunity through restricted airspace, the Pentagon, the White House, the Congress, you name it. They flew where they wanted to. And it caused the Pentagon, and who incidentally lied through their damn teeth, that it was actually a weather inversion. It caused the Pentagon and John Sanford to hold the biggest press conference since the end of World War II. So those 3 cases, I feel, are extremely important.
Chris, you have been oddly quiet, and it disturbs me.
Well, first of all, I had some computer problems. I think they just wanted to knock me off the station or something. I couldn't get back on. But when I became a MUFON field investigator, I was getting all kinds of cases. And one of the things that I found remarkably interesting was these cases that the cops were bringing in. I was talking to cops all over the New York, and they say, I don't want to make an official report. I don't want my name put anywhere. But Chris, here's what I saw. Now, I will tell you, most police officers, if they see it, and today it's a little different, but when I was working, I don't care if an alien fell on the hood of your car. You would just roll them off and just keep driving. You know, you might even run over him with a back tire just to make sure he can't make a report. So, I mean, you would never go into your captain and say, hey, I saw a flying saucer, or I saw an alien, because you'd be seeing the departmental shrink within an hour. So that was really a taboo. And Commander will tell you, and Don will definitely tell you, if you went in the locker room and said, hey, I saw a UFO, you'd have all kinds of aliens on your locker the next day. You'd have all kinds of green goob coming down your locker, you know, pictures, I was here, you know, I had sex with your wife, I'm an alien. And I mean, it was just all crazy shit. So it's very personal when a cop calls you and says, I don't want to do a report. But one of them was so remarkable in near Pine Bush. There was a place called Tuxedo Park, the village of Tuxedo Park. And to this day, it still fascinates me because it's a village. But what people don't realize, it's an enclosed village. And it has its own police force. And the police force is to protect people from coming into the park. You're not allowed into this village. And that was remarkable. And I had a call from a detective sergeant there and said, Chris, I'd like to tell you something. And he says, as I was working on a case and as we're driving through the park, I was near the lake, Tuxedo Park Lake, and I watched a triangle hover over the lake, and it dropped a barrel-sized object into the lake. Now, it wasn't a barrel, but it was a barrel-sized object. And I actually, this is an artist's rendition of what he actually saw. And as you can see, there was something he dropped into the lake at that time. And I says, okay, well, you know, I says, tell me about it. He says, Chris, it just hovered over the lake, it dropped something, and then took off. But the strange thing is, the next 3 nights, people were reporting something that looked like headlights in the lake moving around. And they couldn't figure out what it was. Now, the thing about Tuxedo Park was around that place, they were getting many UFO sightings. They were starting to get all these sightings and nobody could really understand why. And one of the things that during the time is they had a landing right outside the village. They had an actual landing that took place. And we're trying to figure out why in God's name were they having landings and stuff and all this activity. Well, unbeknownst to people in the park, unbeknownst to a lot of people there was a nuclear reactor that DuPont built, and they kept it quiet. They called it a biolab, but they actually built a nuclear reactor into the park. And they sprung a leak. It was leaking radioactive material into the reservoir of the water there. And actually, here's a picture of the actual research center that they had there. And in that mountain area, is a nuclear reactor. They built it into that there. But
none of the citizens knew about that, Chris?
No, not very many. I'll tell you, the only reason I found out is because I was looking for some information on this Tuxedo Park stuff, because there's a laboratory within the park that a billionaire made by the name of Alfred Loomis. And he had created this secret lab for mind control and mind behavior and direct energy weapons. And actually all the
good combination. When you think about it, it's really good combination.
Yeah, it is pretty well and stuff. But they had all the Nazi scientists from Operation Paperclip first stopped there, right at the park. So in this mountain, they were leaking radioactive material into the reservoir. So when I went to go look, I actually stopped at the Historical Society there, and there was a very nice lady. She goes, "Can I help you?" I go, "Yeah, you know, I'm trying to find out." I told her, I'm studying UFOs. I'm trying to find out what you got there. And she kind of looked around, and I go, "Yeah," because I know she wanted to say something to me. She says, well, we're not really supposed to talk about it, but you know, right where that supposed landing and stuff was? I go, yeah. Well, there was a nuclear reactor there and it leaked. And she actually pulled out a postcard and made a photocopy of the postcard. We're on the back of the DuPont photo card, and it was bought by Union Carbide, but it's actually made by DuPont. That it said home of the nuclear reactor right on the back of the postcard. I go, whoa. So we actually, Linda Zimmerman and I actually found the plans on how to dispose of the material. And it was so radioactive that they were afraid that people walking their dog or jogging by the dump trucks that they were going to try to load to get the stuff out. And then, of course, they said, yeah, we tested your water several times. It's safe. Well, wouldn't you know that after this, they had all these sightings there, and they had this thing dropped in the lake, and it was probing around the lake. And
hey, we're from the government. We're here to help.
Yeah. But this is a picture of the lake. Now, they never had this happen until after this incident. But this spot here at the Tupper Lake does not freeze over anymore. It's a circle. And you can see this here. It was sent to me by the detective sergeant. It says, Chris, we have two things that we've never happened before. One, we're getting algae blooms in the middle of the lake that we didn't have before. Okay, algae blooms happen in a lot of lakes before and stuff like that. But the funny part about it is there's no nitrates or phosphates at the edge of the lake, the shores. So whatever's causing that algae bloom's got to be in the middle of the lake. The second thing is they've never had this happen before. They never had a complete circle that does not freeze over in the winter anymore, where the triangle was.
So they have a population of fish there, Chris?
You know what? You're not allowed to put a motorboat. You can only have a sailboat there. So I don't know what the fishing's like, but you are not allowed to dive in the lake. You are not allowed to put a motorboat on the lake there, and you cannot have access to this lake. If you do not live in this village, you have to stop at the gate. The police officer will come out and say, "What is your business here?" They will call up the person that you're going to visit or deliver something to, and they will escort you to there. And then they will escort you out. Now, I was wondering why. Well, the reason why they were doing this is because MIT, Livermore Lab, and all these other places had think tanks there. They actually had where they would bring a bunch of, very brilliant students or teachers or whatever, and say, pretty much lock them in a room and say, figure out how we can break space and time, or how do we make a direct energy weapon? How do we do this? And the equations would actually be done there. And what I didn't know is that at this laboratory, the equations for the atomic bomb were actually done there. They brought in Enrico Fermi very quietly, Albert Einstein, and everybody. And not the bomb was built, but the equations were actually sent to Los Alamos from there. And if you ever want to check out, called the Tower Building, they wrote a book about Alfred Loomis, who was a brilliant physicist and a billionaire. He started the lab there. But there is a military presence there at one time, because the detective sergeant says, Chris, I found this out in the woods there. And that, to me, and maybe Commander can say, is that not an Air Force sticker? This is an old Jeep that they put out. How it got in the middle of the woods, I'll never know. But what do you think that is, Commander?
Well, it looks like an eagle on the left there. And
does it look like a missile command?
Air Defense Command. So that would be the interceptor guys that used to protect the continent of the United States. That looks like Air Defense Command.
Now, I will tell you, during our research, we found out that right near that park were Nike missiles. I guess
That's very popular. They were all over the United States.
Right. So maybe they had them in this park. I don't know and stuff. But
that wouldn't have been the Air Force. That would have been the Army, though.
Would have been the Army. Well, I'm still trying to figure out.
And the interceptors were obviously the Air Force.
Let me ask you, Chris.
Sure.
Who has control of that area? Is it federal, state, or local?
It's a local. It's closed off, but from what the detective sergeant
Legally, I
told-
don't know how they could do that.
Well, they do it. They do it. But I will tell you this. In the park, the detective sergeant told me there is a security group that nobody talks to. They are there to guard the think tanks.
Well, then there's more to it than just
Well, yeah,
this.
yeah, and stuff. But I mean, it is a very complex and very secretive place. They don't talk about the sightings that they have there. This I was very surprised that this detective sergeant actually, got me these photos and stuff of that nature. But he says, Chris, I know for a fact that they have been developing direct energy weapons in this park and stuff of that nature. There are underground bunkers there. There are things that people don't even realize. And like it says, one of the things we were getting is UFO sightings, and we couldn't figure out why. But then we found out that the reactor was leaking into the reservoir and things of that nature.
Wow. We have a gal in chat, Kathleen, who says, confirms you cannot fish in the lake.
What's that?
She says you cannot fish in the lake. There's
It's
no
not.
fish. You cannot fish.
You can't
there.
fish. You can't go.
You can't fish there? Okay.
But
Makes
I mean,
sense.
that's very restrictive on a waterway. Just from my science background, I recall the algae blooms require a warmer water source in order to bloom. And that would, if you had a place that wasn't freezing, would imply that the water in the middle of the lake is.
Well, to Linda Zimmern for her bravery, and I hope she doesn't get arrested when I say this, snuck into the park.
Uh-oh.
And yeah, I don't know how she did it, and I don't want to know. But she got a water sample and actually sent it to the MUFON lab. And there was no nitrates or phosphates. That's how we know. They took a sample of the water from the shorelines, which would be the highest concentration, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing there. It had nothing.
That's really strange.
So that's my first story.
It's the first story. Good deal. I wanted to ask here before we have just a few minutes before we have to break coming up here. And before we do, did any of you get a chance to see the videos that were released by the Sky Watcher program here this week of the jellyfish UAPs? They went out on X, and I gotta say they are the clearest UAP images that I've seen in a while. They got some really good pictures, and I have no idea what to think of what I saw in them. If you get a chance, I know they're out on X, and you can follow the Skywatcher program. This is the gentleman who was with Russ Coulthart, who said that they can summon these things through something called psiotics, and they were apparently bringing in some very strange looking craft that seemed to have the ability to morph into other things. It's almost like watching a transformer toy, turn into things. And one of them is this jellyfish looking thing, and I've got no clue how something like that would fly. Thoughts?
Well, if it's a balloon, it makes sense to me that it could fly that way.
Well, but it was behaving, it would change direction. And I don't think balloons change direction unless the wind changes direction or they're powered in some way. And altitudes would change as well. It just didn't look very balloon-like. But, 1 second you're looking at a jellyfish, and the next second you're looking at something that is kind of a trapezoid and some other stuff, like a, what do you call it? Used to make these shapes in geometry class. They're kind of round and multi-sided, and you roll around.
Tessellations?
Yeah. So it's changing right in front of you. And you got to say, well, do we have any kind of technology that's a shape-shifting technology?
Yeah, we do. It's called
Really?
CGI.
We do. Tell us about
CGI.
that, Don. What do you know about that?
CGI. Movie
Special effects,
magic.
computer-generated imagery is what he's saying.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, how many people have seen orbs morph into?
All right, so
You know,
I'm not going to discount the Padres take, but I remember we had when we had Mark D'Antonio on, and we had the thing floating over in Iraq or Afghanistan, whatever it was. You know, it was a jellyfish thing, and then it was reports that went down into the water. Stand by, we're going to see that at a later date. Flying by, and I looked at it, and somebody said, "Oh, it's just dirt stuck on the lens of the sensor that's looking at it. How come they're not shooting at it? It's right over their heads." And it was a balloon for Eid, which is just finishing up now in the Muslim world. It's the end of Ramadan, and it's the biggest holiday. And they make these balloons, and they're in like Arabic letters, and they get away, and they partially deflate and flying around in the dark, and you get partial light, and they don't make any noise, and they whip around because they go over the top of a generator, and there's heat exhaust coming from the generator, and they do all these crazy things, and you can have two people walking underneath them that don't look up and never see it. I'm not saying that's what the jellyfish what the Padres talking about, but again, I'm always going to go for the most direct, simple answer. Just run the razor right off the bat, and then eliminate those things, and then you end up with what I think is the interesting stuff when you can't just solve it away.
Well, as we wrap up our first hour here, gentlemen, we want to invite our viewers and listeners to stay tuned. We have one more hour to go this evening. We got some more blasts from the past. We're going to talk about the flat.
I think I have the oldest one that's going to be talked about tonight.
Oh, okay. Well, good. I look forward to hearing that. I've got coming up on my end the Flatwoods Monster, or the Great UAP Flap in northeastern Colorado and southern Nebraska Panhandle. That was in 2019 and 2020. So those are all straight ahead. Don't go anywhere, everybody. We'll be back in about 2 minutes at UAP Crossfire.
From Iraq and Afghanistan, our brave warriors are coming home, wounded. Some with wounds you can see, some with wounds you can't see. Wounded Warrior Project was created to support our men and women coming off the battlefield. Please help carry these warriors the rest of the way home. Get involved at woundedwarriorproject.org.
MUFON is the voice of thousands of like-minded people who want to see change. We speak up against UFO secrecy. We engage governments and agencies around the world on the topic. We share information with the public through our journal, website, newsletter, social media, and even our own TV channel. When you join MUFON, you add your voice to the cause. Few things are more important in our time than understanding the UFO question. Join MUFON. Find your friends.
Welcome back to UAP Crossfire, everybody. We're here to discuss all things UAP, and we're kind of going into our past tonight, each of us relating the cases that influenced us most in our journey of investigation. Next one is another one from my childhood. I read about this maybe when I was about 12 years old, and I was obsessed with this case for probably a good half a year, and I read up everything that I could on it. I speak of the Flatwoods Monster incident, and this took place September 12th, 1952, near a small town of Flatwoods in Braxton County, West Virginia. Now, here's how it went down, the notes that I have here. A group of local kids, brothers Edward, he was 13, and Fred May, he was 12, along with their friend Tommy Heyer, age 10, were playing outside near the Flatwoods Elementary School when they saw a bright pulsating object streak across the sky. It looked to them like it crashed or landed on a hill nearby owned by a farmer named G. Bailey Fisher. Excited and curious, they ran to the Mays brothers' house and told Edward and Fred's mom, Kathleen May, what they'd seen. She grabbed a flashlight and, together with the boys, plus a few others who joined in along the way, Neil Noonley, age 14, Ronnie Shaver, age 10, and 17-year-old National Guardsman Eugene G. Lemon, they all ran up the hill to investigate. When they got there, that's when things took an interesting turn. They spotted a glowing, pulsating red light in the distance, and as they approached, there was this thick, acrid mist that filled the air, stinging their eyes and noses. Then Gene Lemon pointed his flashlight at something ahead, and they all froze in their feet right where they stood. It was standing 10 to 12 feet tall. A figure described as having a round, blood-red face with glowing greenish-orange eyes. Eye-like shapes surrounded by a pointed hooded-like structure that gave it the look of a red ace of spades. The body was dark, perhaps black or dark green, with short stubby arms that ended in claw-like hands. Some accounts say it wore a metallic skirt-like lower half with folds. Others claimed it had no visible arms at all. The thing then hissed, made a shrill noise, and started gliding toward them. Well, Lemon freaked out, dropped his flashlight. The whole group bolted down the hill in panic. Their dog, Ricky, tagged along with tail between the legs. Now, this thing has been a very popular UAP monster sighting for many years, made its way into a couple of video games. It's been sort of themed to set the pattern for monster movies related to UAPs. Mystery, though, still lingers. Some investigators did look into this thing and thought that maybe what they saw was a barn owl. Well, gentlemen, you all are familiar with the case. Let's begin with you, Don. Your thoughts?
Well, this is West Virginia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Going back centuries, hundreds of years, there were areas in West Virginia that not even the Native Americans, we used to call them Indians, and then we got politically correct. But there were areas where not even the Native Americans would go. Now, West Virginia has had those areas that are hotbeds of cryptids, okay? Case in point, John Keel and the Mothman, all right, in Point Pleasant. And I might add many others. Now, I'm not saying that that is what this was. What I am saying is that you have to take that into consideration if you consider the subject of cryptids to even be real. So, yeah, I've been familiar with that for a long time, with that story for a very long time. It's fascinating, it's interesting, but ultimately nothing happened. The thing, the creature, whatever, the lights disappeared. So, I don't know.
Commander Cobra, your thoughts on the Flatwoods Monster?
Well, obviously, as Don talked about, when you that area, I've lived and worked in that area a bit. There was a lot of paranormal energy and activity there. There's a famous prison there that still generates incredible amount of participation by researchers. What I found striking about this case is that I never could find where this creature or this event, something like it, showed up again, this particular description. And there were parts of it, and I'm not connecting anything. I'm not saying there was any kind of intentional grafting of stories, but parts and pieces, literally, of the description. The case in Biloxi, Mississippi, where the two fishermen were in the boat and they had the UFO come by, and it almost seemed like a robotic, but it had crab-like hands or arms or manacles at the end of it. Even the basic description kind of matched this one. So it's interesting if you look at a lot of these, you start to see some patterns and you see things coming back. But this particular description never showed up again. And I've never heard it repeated any other time and place in West Virginia.
Well, there was
I think cryptids, especially when you talk with people that are into that part of the study of it, leads to that, what I think we're all coming up against almost constantly. Last week's guests, Stan Gordon, and his work, the interdimensional activity, the intersections that are happening, the rapid appearance and disappearance, the sighting of cryptids, obviously Bigfoot, Yeti being the most popular that are in there, leaving physical manifestations, and they're just not separate events. I know we all agree with that, but I've been in enough conferences where if you bring this up and you're at the UFO UAP table, they kind of politely stop talking to you. It's like it's a repeat of me trying to find a table to sit to have lunch in high school. No room here. You need to go someplace else. So I think that you cannot dismiss that this is connected. That we have these kinds of events that are going to intersect. And I know intersect has changed in our modern lingo, but in this case, I'm talking in a more traditional, where you're having overlaps between different phenomena, different dimensions that we seem to be operating in.
Well, before I throw it to Chris for his thoughts on this, I'll just add this, that there was a writer that came along who was a native of the area, a UFO writer named Gray Barker back in the 1950s, and he had Fate magazine, something I've not seen, but I guess it was a thing.
Oh my God, Fate was extremely popular.
I was too busy reading Mad magazine, so I didn't really have time for that.
I love Mad Magazine.
Gray Barker is a story in himself.
Absolutely.
He is. Okay, well, perhaps
my God.
We'll get a story or two for you in a moment, but he wrote a book called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, in which he mentions the Flatwoods Monster, and he ties it in with a Men in Black incident that supposedly took place after this, where there were some suspicious-looking characters asking questions who were dressed in black. Decades later, skeptic Joe Nickel investigated the case, and he's still sticking to his, they saw a meteor crash and then an owl. Now, my farm in Nebraska, where I used to live, we had owls. I have never had one with a red big face and glowing green eyes.
You don't drink this, do you, Padre?
I don't.
I bet you see a lot of things after a gallon of that.
Yeah, but I don't really think that, when you look at the incident itself, you had some people here in their very early teens, age 10 to 14, and we would hope that they wouldn't. Well,
sure.
West Virginia. Chris, what are your thoughts on Flatwoods Monster or cryptids?
Well, first of all, I agree with Commander. After about 4 or 5 bourbons, I've seen everything from aliens to cryptids to God knows what.
And I can tell you right now, I've written at least 4 or 5 books in that state. Yeah. They're not publishable. They're very hard to decipher, and I have to kind of go back into that state to actually read them.
And the thing is, cryptids are so hard. They're harder than UFOs to try to determine if they're real or how they are and stuff of that nature, because there's very little evidence that's laid. I mean, you can't find, I haven't never heard of anybody finding skeletons of a cryptid or, something of that nature that they can really say, hey, wow, this is crazy. But I did try one time to try to get something with a cryptid. And we actually put a person under hypnoregression. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a lot of faith in hypnoregression. It's got to be done just a certain way and got to be done the right way, or it goes right down the tubes. So, but we tried it. And remarkably, the guy, when he was young, spotted a crypto type of creature. And what we did was we tried to get him to go under hypno, which he did, and have an artist draw what he saw. And this is exactly what we came up with. So we don't know really what it is, but this type of creature was in the Tully Woods near Kelly, New York. This is where he saw it. And, some people have said this is exactly what they've seen down in West Virginia or some places in Virginia area or wooded areas all over. It's a wind creature, some kind of cryptoid that, can fly, can partially like the Mothman and partially like,
it's got a New Jersey Devil kind of look to it.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean,
do you think the New Jersey Devil, when everybody comes down to the Jersey Shore, goes up to the West Virginia just to, relax?
Maybe. I mean, maybe he took the wrong exit and ended up in Tully, New York. I don't know, but I mean, that's certainly. Now, I'd like to. He denied taking a drug test, so I wanted him to just. Well, LSD will do a lot of crazy things for you. So.
Yeah. Well, I would say this, that with cryptids, and people always say, how come I don't see a body? And I've said this before. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I've spent a lot of time in the wild, in really remote areas, all the way from the Rio Grande River down in South Texas to Prudhoe Bay, Arctic Ocean shore community up there in northern Alaska. I have never seen a bear carcass killed, that died of natural causes. I've run across deer. I've run across, prey animals, which tend to be more numerous. But I've been in areas thick with mountain lions. I've only seen live ones. And, if you have something that is a predator, you guys spend any time outdoors? You ever seen just a naturally dead carcass of a major predator?
Usually only bones, if that, and the bones are generally scattered. Look,
Right.
In the wild, everything is either a predator or food. And if something dies, and I spent an inordinate amount of time out in the field, in the woods and what have you. When I was a kid, I used to get in trouble with my parents because I grabbed my .22 rifle and a backpack and go up into the Alleghenies, and I'd stay up there for a long time. My mother went nuts with me, okay? But stuff gets consumed very quickly.
Well, I mean, just a simple thing like the antler droppings of moose and deer where I live. If you don't get to them within a very short period of time, mice will start chewing and other animals will start chewing on them because of the mineral deposits that are in there. They don't break down very easily, but other animals will rapidly start working on them because it is a critical mineral source for the cycle of life that goes on. I have a lot of acreage. I'm on it a lot. I've only found one shed of a moose in all the time. I find evidence all the time where they're rubbing up against the trees. Just they're not rubbing up against the trees at the time that they're pushing their antlers off. Only one that has been found. My neighbor found a moose that had gone through the ice where I am and got the whole rack on it. But that was obvious, like Don said, it was there for a long time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me we don't find it, but you would think that something, especially when you talk about Bigfoot type activity, that does seem to leave physical traces behind it. And not to throw this off too much, but I've never heard anyone say they have found the scat, the excrement from these animals. They find the footprints.
From Bigfoot?
Yeah.
Oh, we've heard about scat being found. Absolutely.
Yeah. Really?
Basically, humans, human shaped, but the size of a horse, would produce. Not something you want to step in.
Try bringing that to the laboratory.
Yeah, well, that's my point, though, for the sampling of it. One quick thing, you notice that my eyewear changed. This is just to let the audience know that on the break, I do check the email page. And I was I had a listener who asked not to be named on air. Did I break my alien eyewear because they hadn't seen it in a long time? And I guess they were jonesing for a little of the ETIs of Commander Cobra before I disappear for a bit. So I wanted to make sure that I fulfilled every wish that I possibly could. Also, if I can, Bill Frankenberger sent us a nice note from last week's show with the Paranormal Rangers. He really enjoyed the show. He's out in California, and I hope he's doing well. He's up in Northern California, and I know that we had some earthquake activity, so I hope Bill is doing well.
Well, in the chat too, we have a question for Mr. Decker, along with a flurry of emojis from Genghis Khan, a number of poop emojis, and then an alien that looks like you, Commander Cobra.
And then I see something about poop Don. So I'm not sure what's being said there.
Yeah.
Well,
is that poop? Wait, what was that? What was that?
I can say that my GI tract has been working wonderfully recently. So,
Praise
there
God.
you go.
Let me look at this comment here from a viewer for you, Detective Decker. Were you a police officer when you were investigating the cattle mutilations?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That was from Wyatt. Thank you, Wyatt, for that. And others, if you have questions, you want to pop them up in chat. Appreciate you interacting with the show. I'm going to move to another one of my experiences. This is the one that I think really just launched me back into the whole UAP thing after a big hiatus. And we've talked about this before on the show. I've got some new information tonight about it. But, New Jersey has been in the news lately for their drone and UAP activity. There was one that was very long duration and impactful flap, I'll call it, of mysterious objects in the sky that ran from December 2019 to March of 2020. And the area of concentration was far northeastern Colorado and the southern counties of the Nebraska Panhandle. And this is near and dear to me because I was there and I was involved in this thing and investigating, trying to figure out what they were. I had a farm in Cheyenne County, Nebraska, and that's the biggest town nearby, Sidney, about 6,000 people. I lived a few miles outside of Gurley, population 136 at the time. But we were in an area where there were a number of missile silos. This was the Minuteman III missiles from F.E. Warren Air Force Base in the vicinity of Cheyenne, Wyoming. And if you haven't seen a missile silo, you probably, if you've driven across western Nebraska or northeastern Colorado or eastern Wyoming, you've driven right by them, but you just didn't know what they were. These enclosures are cyclone wire fence, and they're very tall, razor wire on the top, and they encompass a square that, I don't know the exact size, but let's call it 100-yard square, something like that. In the middle of this just looks like this very flat concrete slab. That's the lid, if you will. And beneath that is where the missile is. Scattered throughout these clusters of these missile silos, you have the command center. And that is a larger area, again, fenced off. And that is where the security personnel stay with jurisdiction over a certain number of missile silos in their vicinity. That is where their vehicles are kept. These are armored Humvees with fully automatic 30 caliber machine guns mounted up in the back in a turret, or in the case of the ones that often frequented my area, a fully automatic 40 millimeter grenade launcher, a chain fed one that can pump a lot of grenades out into a small area very quickly. There was one of these missile silos less than 300 yards from my front door. So it was just there all the time. And we would interact with the Air Force personnel as they serviced the silo and looked at it. And now inside these fenced enclosures are sophisticated detection equipment. Someone shot a pheasant near my farm that flew into the enclosure. And of course, cameras come on at the sign of motion activation, and you see someone with a gun standing outside a missile enclosure. You want to talk about response time. The Air Force gets there very swiftly, and they want to know what's going on. But that said, with this flap, what happened is we began to see objects in the night sky that would appear in the vicinity of the command centers and the silos, as well as many other areas. They would appear over farm fields. They would appear over the smaller towns like Dalton, and Gurley, and Lodgepole in my area. And these were seen by very reputable people, including law enforcement. It kicked off in mid-December 2019, apparently in Phillips County, Colorado, which is near the Nebraska border. Odd lights hovering overhead. The Denver Post picked up the story on December 23rd, quoting Sheriff Thomas Elliott, who said that the objects were estimated to have 6-foot wingspans and flying in a grid-like pattern. They would appear around 7 p.m. and vanish by 10 p.m., and they were cruising at 200 to 300 feet off the ground. Now, I can attest to that because in our area, they would also appear almost, you could set your watch by 7 p.m. By that time, the sun had been down for a couple of hours. It was quite dark, and there they were. Now, I never saw enough of a structure to calculate the wingspan, but I did see these several times. We had a Facebook chat going where people would say where they were, and people would go out and take pictures. But all you would be seeing in the picture would be a light in the sky or a short video of something that was flying around. These were blinking red, green, and white lights. I also saw blue lights on them. But they were also sometimes seen in the vicinity of what people called a mothership. This was a larger drone that was in the vicinity of these smaller ones. The smaller craft were 5 to 6 feet in diameter. The larger one was the size of an SUV, according to law enforcement. By the Christmas time, this was just going rampant. Ranchers and farmers were reporting drones buzzing their properties, disturbing cattle and horses. And some people started talking like they did in New Jersey. We're going to take one of these things down. We're going to start shooting on it. And I remember that the county sheriffs were warning us, saying, don't do that. You just don't go out and shoot something in the sky that you don't know what it is. You can get a lot of trouble in that. But in Chase County, for instance, Nebraska, deputy reported seeing 30 to 50 flying independently in one area around a mothership that hovered over that area for hours. This is really interesting because drones typically don't have that kind of duration, but there they were, reported by law enforcement. A Kansas Highway Patrol trooper near the Colorado border described a spotlight-equipped drone with 10 to 15 others weaving patterns around. They were spotted flying grid patterns over pastures, and the scale was staggering. Over 3 weeks, sightings popped up nightly across this whole region. The story was even picked up by the Daily Mail in England, who reported that they had seen reports of 40 to 50 SUV-sized drones moving at speeds up to 120 miles per hour, swarming the area, sometimes toying with law enforcement or harassing livestock with blinding lights. One sheriff recounted a chase where a massive drone bathed his team in light so bright they couldn't look at it, illuminating 150 to 300 yards with daylight level light around their unit. By January 6, 2020, the tiny town of Brush, Colorado, hosted a meeting of 77 sheriffs and state officials and federal reps from the FBI, the FAA, and others scrambling for answers, but the press was locked out of that meeting. The FAA launched an investigation joined by the FBI and the Air Force and local law enforcement, forming a task force, and they ruled out covert military ops with a high level of confidence per FAA documents. Now, where have we heard of the FAA denying the existence of these, these drone type objects? Well, the theories floated around, and posts on what was then Twitter called them creepy and unexplained. But then by January 13th, the activity had significantly diminished, though it was here and there going on into March of that year. By March 2020, Douglas D. Johnson, a researcher with the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, dug into FAA files via FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, and found consistent eyewitness details, mothership, grid patterns, but was not able to find any more information. Colorado Senator Cory Gardner, Nebraska Senator Deb Fischer pressed for answers, citing that some cattle had been injured and that there were aviation risks posed by these things flying around, but they were unsuccessful in getting any additional information. Yuma, Colorado's mayor floated the idea of drone restriction laws, and the FAA's Steve Dixon mused in a December 31st email not too long ago, we would have called these UFOs, hinting at how they were behaving and being seen by the public. So there was also then, later we found out 57 incidents over 5 years related to sightings near nuclear facilities. Again, we find this happening with UAPs interested in nuclear facilities, and no resolution on any of this. One night, I looked out and I saw one of these things that was going to come right over my farm. I got Mrs. Carlson. We got in my pickup truck. We said, we're gonna chase this thing. We're gonna follow it. And the road,
like a date night with Padre.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she was up for it, so we got in, and the roads in this part
of moonshine though, huh, Padre?
No.
The only moonshine is the one that comes down from the celestial body onto the earth.
Poetic, Commander.
Another land of 1,000 veils.
Well, we took off past the missile silo and down the road into the area where it was heading. It was a really remote part where Cheyenne County goes into Kimball County. The roads there are bad. I mean, they're not even graveled. They are literal dirt rutted roads. And we reached speeds up to 60 miles an hour chasing this thing. And it was always the same distance in front of us. It was that toying with us. When we slowed down, it would slow down. And then when we tried to speed up and catch it, it sped up just enough to stay just in front of us. And eventually, after about a half hour racing down these dirt roads, we gave up on it. It's kind of disappeared into the southern horizon. But that was a very strange experience for me. And I do not think there's anything extraterrestrial about it. There's obviously some kind of intelligent control. Whoever was controlling it knew what was in the vicinity of the drone because they responded to our pursuit in that way. So let's go around the horn. Because he's our aviation expert, I'll start with Commander Cobra. What are your thoughts on this?
So, Benny, I was jotting down a few notes while you were talking. You touched upon one of the three cases or three situations that I was going to cite as well tonight. I have a couple others around this one that we'll hopefully get to. So, I agree with you that this is probably some other kind of technology of our terrestrial sense. I think this was probably, when you see things that are doing operations in grid squares, that's usually some kind of organized reconnaissance, some organized information gathering. And it can be for anything. It can be for gas leaks. It can be for crops. It can be crop dusting. I mean, they're using drone technology now to put crop dusting. And the reason they like doing that is because it can be very, very precise. You don't have to carry huge amounts of the fertilizer or the pesticide, and you can do a very, very specific application. It just requires a lot of turnover. What you were describing at the end, when you were out on date night with Mrs. Carlson chasing this, is a technology that is very important into the future of what drones and drone delivery, unmanned vehicle delivery is going to be, and that's the collision avoidance aspect. I'm sure almost all of you drive a vehicle now that if you put it onto cruise control and a vehicle comes in front of you, your car will slow down and you can set the distance on how close you can follow the car in front of you. And then when that car moves out of the way, then you can increase that. So that kind of description really fits, and it fits in a situation where you may be testing or operationally testing. Now, you talk about the nuke, the missile silos, and the nuke strike capability. Obviously, that is a critical part of national defense. It wouldn't surprise me if there were ways that they were looking for reducing or improving, maybe that's a better word to use, the kind of surveillance and maybe even active response to anything around the silos. We have a large helicopter contingent that services, moves people, moves support, supplies, in security forces around those facilities. Very sensitive. But they're also, as you described, Padre, as sensitive they are, and there is almost an openness about how they're laid out there in that. And then partially that's to make it more difficult, I think in theory now more than it was, and it may have been more in practice earlier, to detecting where they're at. You don't have a large structure around them. So all the things you described make me think that this was maybe something that was fairly well organized, something that was set up to go forward with it. And the parallels, which is in my notes to talk, is New Jersey. Now, I can understand why you're not going to get answers when you're possibly talking about how we're protecting around a nuclear facility, a missile facility. I don't quite understand, except for the occasion that we were in a presidential election, what was going on in the New Jersey corridor, although I do have an article that I sent to all of you earlier this week on that, what was happening there and the test that was going on. So in summation, we have seen a lot of things happen around missile sites. Our friends that are on the pointy end of tariffs right now have bought a lot of farmland and bought a lot of spaces around there. Is this one of the ways that they're looking to counter and respond, or possibly is this something that was being done by a foreign power? I'm pretty sure the foreign power would have been taken down pretty quickly. I don't think there would have been much hesitation going on there. But remember, a couple of the things have happened since this event, and this is a pivotal event, what happened in the west of the United States around this time period. The Ukraine war exploded with the use of UAPs, drones, in a responsive combat situation. and in many ways, with very simply jury rigged with an offensive weapon or an explosive of some kind, flying it right into vehicles, disabling, performing the reconnaissance that's going on. I just read an article this morning that the United States Marine Corps that says every Marine will be a drone operator, which goes on to the very much that every Marine is a rifleman. No matter what your specific code is in the Marine Corps, everyone knows that the primary prima facie mission is to be a rifleman in the Marine Corps. And now they're adding into that every Marine will be a drone operator. Talking about a small drone that can be unfolded, sent out in the battlefield. It's an innovative approach to where we're at. But think about when all this was happening, how it was making the news, and then what happened afterwards. Things that happened in Ukraine, what we saw happen during the flight test in New Jersey, right around the time of the election.
Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more information here before we check in with our other two gentlemen. Shortly after this was publicized by the Air Force, Operation Sentinel. The United States has been trying to upgrade its intercontinental ballistic missile program and hardware for some time. The program called Sentinel is now underway, and it is impacting this exact same area, the exact same missile silos. The Air Force is replacing the Minuteman III missile with the Sentinel missile. They are upgrading the sensor suites around the various launch sites and the individual silos. And I put forth something online. I published quite a long post while we were in the middle of this, a theory I had that they were testing, as Commander Cobra astutely observed, a new type of surveillance system. And I had this weird idea that maybe what they're doing is they're taking an object of some sort, and during the day they're running out and they're putting it somewhere. And then at night, they're letting the drones go and try to find that item. Well, my internet response suddenly blew up. I had the Associated Press calling me for interviews. I had people who were very interested in this, wanting to talk to me about this idea because it made sense. What do you think about that idea, Commander?
Are you dragging it to me, sir?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely. It makes perfect sense. That was what there's three critical things that have to happen. One is you have to have the autonomy or a good link that allows it to be flown from a ground position. So however you're doing one of those two things, or maybe a combination. What I mean by the autonomy is you program a flight plan into your aircraft. It goes out and it does this work, and then it has some higher order of functionality. It's looking for something that's not supposed to be there. It's looking for what we sometimes refer to as change technology, where it looks for something that's different in the terrain from a database that was established. So it looks for changes that were made, footprints, road, tire tracks, things like that. Not new. We did this manned assets. That's how my personal experience in Iraq, we would fly and check the oil pipelines because they were a favorite target from the part of Iraq I was at to where they would shift it over to central Iraq. And if they blew those up, it was, the insurgency was causing all kinds of problems because it shut down a lot of money that Iraq was trying to generate with their oil sales. You'd fly by and you could tell when there were people who had footprints. You could pick up the footprints if you look careful enough. Then we had other things that came, not super fancy technology, just really good optics. Or you could tell by heat source at night when the activity was going on. So if you now have this that's responsive, it goes out and does that, it makes perfect sense. The other thing is, many times, if you have a possible threat vector and you are in a very high state of experimentation, you will field it to see how it does against real things. During Desert Storm, everything that was past bench level kind of testing was sent over to Desert Storm. We had all kinds of things flying over it. Permissive airspace. We had air superiority set up pretty quickly, and they were doing live operational work with a multitude of devices and capabilities because the environment was permissive, we had a threat, and it was the best place to test it.
Okay, Chris, your thoughts on
One thing, Padre, before
Yes.
before we go on. Speaking of drones, yesterday I saw I saw a report dealing with our situation here on the southern border. Now, the current administration has already designated those Mexican drug cartels as terrorists. Okay. Not only are they bringing fentanyl into the country by the ton, they're trafficking women, children, etc. These people have been designated, in essence, enemy combatants. There is talk now about the possibility of armed drones making strikes down on the southern border. Now, my question to the panel is, what do you guys think about that? I personally, need I say it, I'm all in favor of it.
The nation is breathless for a moment. Which way will Decker come down on this?
Oh, such a mystery.
I
it's
thought
such a
he would
mystery.
say,
It's
let the border
talking
open.
with King Solomon.
Yeah.
Shall I split the baby?
Okay, Chris. Sorry, you looked like you were getting a little drowsy.
No. I just love to hear Don. I know that secretly he goes, let the illegals go. Let the illegals go. But we won't talk about that. Anyways.
Yeah, your thoughts.
Go ahead, Decker. What do you guys say?
Well, what do
anyways,
you guys think about that? Do you think we would be currently in our rights
we're
to
flying
do
U2
that?
missions. In open press, we're flying U2 missions and rivet joint missions right now. And we have been for over the last 2-3 weeks. Those are two very sophisticated reconnaissance assets. Everyone knows the U2, the Dragon Lady, the black airplane that does that work. What's interesting is the way they're flying the rivet joint, which is built on a 707 airframe, and it's a very sophisticated electronic reconnaissance aircraft, is it never enters the Mexican airspace. It flies right up into the I can't think of the name of the Gulf of Baja there. I can't think of the right name for that body of water in there. And President Trump hasn't renamed it yet. I'm sure that's coming next year. But what I'm getting at is we probably have that well targeted. We do predator strikes very, very easily. We also have other airplanes that do this work very, very well. I think if you want to thwart and really get more kick for your punch, if you can follow my crazy analogy here, using something like a drone, a Predator type aircraft, a Reaper type airplane, presents an unbelievable fear factor for these terrorist organizations. Because although they're enemy combatants, they're not very dedicated and they have very little discipline. They have a very strange, they have it's more of a gang type hierarchy. And I think that's not even fair. Meaning, if you have an aircraft that stays on station for up to 12 to 18 hours and can react real time and very precisely take out one vehicle, one building, and still stay there to be relieved by another one, it makes it very threatening to the point of hysteria for those people. I think they're going to very quickly find something else to do.
Don't they have like a ninja bomb now that has swords that come out just to basically slice and dice a guy from? We did that.
Yeah, it'll penetrate a lot of things of metal on there. The switchblade, what you're referring to as the switchblade munition, it's pretty impressive. The very important part is you can hit these things and not disturb the neighbors. I mean, you might wake them and you might break some windows in China, but you're not taking their house down. So this is the big thing that is now happening when you're trying to put this. It's a huge burden that the United States military was forced to take on. And what I mean by that is very precise striking, not just for the particulars of the target, but to have very low collateral damage. We are very sensitive, and our public is very demanding that collateral damage be held to a minimum, and that's a good thing. But what that created is things like small diameter bombs. I can't even tell you how many of those you can stick into something like a B-2. That, as long as it's up there and dropping these very precisely, you saw that during Desert Storm. They were putting them in. You just say what window you wanted them to go into, and they were putting them into that window. What people don't realize is they have the ability to have the endurance so that you do not. I had a target in Iraq. I've talked about it in the past. We had caught some of the worst bad guys in my part of the country. And they just conveniently also were running a daycare out of the place that they were staying at. And we were within seconds of releasing the rounds that was going to level where they were at, until my backseater spotted and saw kids running around there, and we were to pull that off. And I'm one of my most proud moments for my backseater in doing that, because we were after these bad guys, but we were not going to throw innocents into that mess. And we were not even near the precision that we have today. Pretty close, but it's far surpassed where we are now.
Chris, we have not heard enough from you this hour. I want to make sure
you've heard plenty from me. Well, I kind of agree with Commander. They always say the military's equipment is probably 100 years more advanced than what we know. President Trump has already said that he's got stuff that we haven't seen that can do a hell of a job that has been kept.
I want to jump in on that end of that, Chris. Go ahead. I want to jump in the end, though.
But there's 2 destroyers in the Gulf of America right now. They can use drones anytime. I just think that they're just kind of feeling out the Mexican government and how far they can go with this. But if I was a head of the cartel, I'd be up in my life insurance policy, because I got a feeling they're not long for this world. I think exactly what Commander says. They're going to pinpoint and take these cartel heads out. Now, once you take these cartels out, then other guys are going to go, I don't know if I want that position. Especially
and it
with
has the added benefit. There'd be a lot of infighting about who takes over.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. That's true. That's very true, Don.
So obviously, if you read Tom Clancy back in the day, Clear and Present Danger, not a new concept, been around a long time. And of course, there it was very, very controversial, because they used very precise strikes to take out all the kingpins when they were at meetings and things that were going on.
I got a question for you, Commander, real quick.
Throw one thing in there, Chris.
Yeah.
You talked about the president saying advanced technology. And a couple of weeks back, we had Steve Douglas on with us and talking, and we talked about some pictures, and he showed the flying wing. There's a very strong argument going around on Twitter, X, and the rest, that the things that he had taken pictures of, that he had reported on, and what he had intercepted radio calls on, may be the technology that you're seeing with the F-47 that's coming out in the NGAT. And the Padre and I had a real rolling discussion about this a week or so back on this very particular subject. Do we already have these planes flying? I don't think we have a large number flying, because we haven't produced a sizable number of these aircraft. But I think that there is a lot of validity to that remark about that we're a little bit further ahead. And now you back that in. I started the show out about tariffs, and I think it does have relevance to our UAP discussion. We're cranking things up in a lot of areas. One of the reasons that everyone is playing very careful with the narco business is the amount of money globally that industry, as heinous as it is performing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Roads don't get built in parts of the world because they collected taxes and tolls. They get built because of the ill-gotten gains of what is going on in the narco-terrorism.
And the Mexican government, from top to bottom, has been bought.
But Don, I'm going to also tell you, Don, the United States benefit from it. Parts of Florida were developed. You didn't build the strip malls. You didn't build the real estate development that went on the Gulf of America coast, all the way through Mississippi, Alabama, going into Texas, because of oil profits solely. There's a lot generated because of what was going on. My God, the CIA has been caught being drug dealers to gain budgetary control, as well as other activities going on. All those things said, I think very precise and takedowns. And I think there's a new sheriff in town. I don't think he's playing by the rules. I think most of the world is kind of waking up to that. Again, what does that mean about you? I kind of said it in jest, but what does this mean for UAP activity and sightings? I think you may actually see more being reported, being experienced from a terrestrial and maybe other places. Because when we have this activity level come up, the traditional UFO, or now UAP vernacular, seems to increase.
Jumps up.
I saw a video clip today from Stephen L. Klost. He's a general in Space Force, and he was speaking to a group at Hillsdale College. And if I understood him correctly, he says we have the technology today that can take a person from where you are to anywhere else on Earth in 1 hour.
It's called SpaceX.
You mean launch them on a missile to
No,
somewhere?
I mean, think about what Musk is doing. Musk has taken 1950s, 1960s, mainly Japanese sci-fi movies where the rockets take off and they land on their tail, okay, with the smoke and flames coming out, and they land on pads. He's made it kind of like everyday activity. When you launch these things, they're landing on barges in the water. Okay?
Yeah.
Now they cut them with the giant chopsticks. There are people saying in space flight that is almost up there to when we successfully first landed on the moon, because of what that technology means. And as I know, everyone loves, he's the guy to love to hate right now. I never would have bought a Tesla, and now I want to buy a Tesla only because I just want to piss everybody off. Okay, I never would have. I can't stand that technology. I got a president running around saying it's a computer, or it's computer. Not even it. There's no article in that. God, have you ever seen a man that can take the language and absolutely embody it in a way that he owns it? He talks in memes, and he doesn't even have to show a meme. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay, enough of my just loving when he's going on that stuff. So the military is very strongly looking at, and I think this is part of the crunch that you're going to see with mainly the PRC, where they're really feeling the pressure here, is that you have the ability to pinpoint. Doesn't mean there's a return flight out of that, but pinpoint, drop, and insert almost anything. Troops, weapons, whatever. That's where we're approaching.
I hadn't even thought of that. Launching Marines to distant shores.
We've been talking about that in the community since the 90s. There was talk about being able to launch a glider-type spacecraft that could get almost anywhere on the globe between 1 to 2 hours. And it would glide back down through the atmosphere. The really tricky part, of course, is when you go suborbital and you have all that friction, come back down, and then be able to make a survivable crash-type landing, where you would either deploy parachutes or whatever, so you're partially flying, and then you would do that. And then you would emerge, and now 50 miles behind your lines, you have established a large number of Marines that are moving or have established a base, and it can be resupplied the same way. Complete game changer. Remember, that's the service, though, that chased VTOL aircraft, meaning the Harrier, and over-the-horizon capability with helicopters to where we are today.
Well, I guess ICBM is going to stand for Intercontinental Ballistic Marine. If we're going to be shooting them all over the planet. We only have 2 minutes left, so let's just go around the horn with some closing thoughts. Let's start with you, Mr. DePerno.
Closing thoughts. I just think that, I think the most exciting time for UAP is going to be coming up maybe this year. I don't think we're going to get disclosure, but like Commander says, I don't need the president to come out. I know what's going on.
Commander?
1639, John Winthrop, Governor, Boston Bay Colony. Have you, the audience, look it up. The first recorded UAP UFO in the colonies. It's great to see you guys. I'm going to be gone for a few weeks. I will try to join you from my remote location in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia over the next few weeks. And as always, it's just always a privilege to run around with you guys and have fun.
Don Decker, your thoughts.
I love it when Commander comes on and gets a little lubed. I love to hear his soliloquies. Okay, Commander, it's a genuine privilege to hear that.
Don, where did you find that word?
He meant to say soliloquy.
Yeah, I was like,
I have to drink.
I got to look that one up in the dictionary.
You're a smart ass, you aren't you, Cobra? A real smart ass.
Not me.
You really think that word's in the dictionary, Don?
Hmm?
I'm
married to the word lady.
As the designated driver on this particular ship this evening, I'm going to have to close this out. I want to thank you all for tuning in and listening. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Hope to see you here next Thursday night. Good night from UAP Crossfire.